the formal inaugural of this third edition of Deccan Dialogue in the presence of distinguished guests. I am Sandeep from the Department of External Relations at ISB and an analyst from ISB's Management Program in Public Policy. Former External Affairs Minister Srimati Sushma Swaraj once said that discussions on foreign policy should not remain confined to the select few, and that there is a need to take these conversations to villages and small towns, to school classrooms, and to vernacular media outlets. This is the only way to evolve a well-informed and democratic approach to foreign policy that takes into account the voices of all stakeholders, she said. Resonating with her vision, I am sure conferences like Deccan Dialogue is a step in that direction. Deccan Dialogue started as an idea to have a dialogue on diplomacy in down south. And this idea, with the support and partnership of Ministry of External Affairs Government of India, became an initiative in 2018, and so far we have done 2 annual editions. And this year, it gives me immense pleasure to have the presence of Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar. Dr. Jaishankar has been India's Minister of External Affairs since May 2019. He was India's Foreign Secretary for 3 years from 2015 to 2018. In a career spanning 4 decades in the Indian Foreign Service, he served as India's ambassador to China and the US, among other roles, and also played an important part in the Indo-US civil nuclear deal. Dr. Jaishankar is an MA in Political Science and an MPhil and PhD in International Relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Along with him in the inaugural, we have Ambassador Rahul Chhabra, Secretary, Economic Relations, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, Shri Sunil Kant Munjal, one of the founding members of ISB, Chairman, Hero Motocorp, and past President of CII, Professor Rajendra Srivastava, Dean, Indian School of Business, and Novartis Professor of Marketing, Strategy, and Innovation. Honorable Minister, ISB has this tradition of planting a sapling by our honorable guests who visit our campus. This being a virtual event, and to mark your virtual visit, we have arranged for your virtual tree plantation ceremony.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to join you all at the 3rd edition of the Deccan Dialogue. Let me begin by congratulating the Indian School of Business, Hyderabad, the States Division of the Ministry of External Affairs, and our Hyderabad Branch Secretariat for coming together to make this possible. This dialogue is notable for a number of reasons, perhaps as much for its location as for its organization and theme. Our objective in having such a gathering in Hyderabad is to drive home the point that foreign policy today extends beyond Delhi. After all, we have already seen that in the transformation of our national politics. A fuller reflection of the diverse stakeholdership on policy making is part of the evolution of our society. Indeed, my experience of holding discussions in different regions has brought home the value of multiple perspectives that they allow us to access. At the very least, they encourage us to transcend the governmental and bureaucratic ethos in which policy making normally takes place. But just think about this. How much different the world looks from a city, state, or region that is deeply involved in the global IT or pharma business, or when it is strongly linked to exports and services to a proximate region like the Gulf. For that matter, if it is a maritime rather than a landlocked state, or if it faces the east rather than the west. In fact, in a globalized economy, every region and economic sectoral activity has its own set of priorities abroad. Creating a more comprehensive matrix of these interests actually helps fashion a more rounded and more democratic definition of our own national interest. You could reasonably ask me why this is important. And the answer is that what happens in the world is increasingly vital for India to understand and appreciate. This has always been so, and our history has repeatedly demonstrated the costs of neglecting the implications of external developments. But it is even more so today because, in a variety of ways, we live in a much more globalized and interdependent world. Now, let me also admit that if there are two terms that are overused to the point of becoming cliches, it is these two. Yet, they represent a reality that is important for us to dissect accurately. Generally speaking, when we speak of globalization, we refer to their more transactional elements like trade, finance, and mobility. Indeed, their aggregates and the regimes that regulate them constitute the primary focus of globalization debates. This, therefore, becomes an argument of which society is more open to the world. Implicit in that exercise is a recognition that there is a choice there. Each nation has the ability to assess its interests, frame its policies, and modulate its engagement. But there are the more existential aspects of globalization as well, one where the elements of choice are much less. The three most vivid examples of them today are climate change, terrorism, and pandemics. None of them are a choice of an impacted society, yet all of them, as we are currently experiencing, affect us profoundly. A serious discussion on our engagement with the world must, therefore, make a distinction between the two. Now, few would argue with the assertion that the direction of our development in the last quarter century has been more global, as also more beneficial. There is no doubt that the reform era has made us more connected, more contemporary, and more comfortable with the world. They opened up new opportunities, whether it was in trade and investment or in travel and tourism. No question, today's India is far more international than the one before. Its embrace of the world has been strongly facilitated by the technologies of the digital era. The globe is not just a marketplace or even a workplace. It is today a source of ideas, inspiration, and aspirations. Rural India wants what urban India has, and they, in turn, set their benchmarks on global availability. Collectively, our greatest gain has been in more open minds. But there is the practical aspect to it as well. In the modern history of the world, few nations have developed rapidly without accessing resources, technologies, and best practices from abroad. The issue, therefore, is not whether we should globalize or not. Indeed, presenting it in that manner is to create false choices. This is not a question of going into the future or the past. It is a debate about what kind of future we envision. An honest self-assessment of our economic performance must begin with the recognition that it was not our karma to see the state of our manufacturing today. Far from being an inevitability, this is the result of policies, preparations, assessments, and course corrections, and their lack. The question after 1992 was never of an open or a shut economy. It was one of negotiating an optimal engagement with the world. And success in that regard should not have been determined by GDP growth rate alone. It should have equally taken into account the sustainability of the processes we had entered, the employment consequences thereof, and the all-round development of our society. We not only failed to develop the deep strengths that a large industrial economy like ours should have, we actually created an employment challenge by becoming over-dependent on imports. And in doing so, we neglected what is my principal message to you today: adequate awareness of the world. In the name of openness, we have allowed subsidized products and unfair production advantages from abroad to prevail. And all the while, this was justified by the mantra of an open and globalized economy. It was quite extraordinary that an economy as attractive as India allowed the framework to be set by others. With the passage of time, our predicament became increasingly serious. The choice was to double down on an approach whose damaging consequences were already apparent, or to have the courage to think through the problem for ourselves. We chose the latter. This is not an issue of just trade or even of economics. As the world of technology applications and global production becomes more integrated, choices today have a much deeper strategic implication. The limited progress we have made and the gap with our real potential puts us in an especially difficult position. As it is, the effect of past trade agreements has been to deindustrialize some sectors. The consequences of future ones would lock us into global commitments, many of them clearly not to our advantage. Those who argue stressing openness and efficiency do not present the full picture. This is equally a world of non-tariff barriers, of subsidies, and of state capitalism. Without exaggeration, what we will be deciding now will determine whether India will become a first-class industrial power or not. And that is why the outlook of Atmanirbhar Bharat is so crucial today. This approach, instead of allowing others to decide our future prospects, is a case for building strong national capabilities and deep strengths. It is far from turning our back on the world. In fact, it is to enter the global arena with cards to play, not just to provide a market for others. This is really about seriously building comprehensive national power. Our success in doing so will determine future terms of engagement and our standing with the world. The challenges of existential globalism are no less pressing and call for an equally clear-headed response. When it came to climate change, many of you would be aware that India played a decisive role in creating a consensus at the Paris COP21. We went beyond our national contribution, leading the initiative for the International Solar Alliance that has now gathered so much traction. Through all the ups and downs of world politics in the last few years, we have never wavered in this commitment. We not only believe this is truly existential, we are also clear that the most vulnerable to climate change must lead the way. And which is why we have now pushed for a coalition for a disaster-resilient infrastructure. As regards terrorism, the era of not my problem came to an end in 9/11, but it has still to produce a wholehearted international collaborative effort. We have in our immediate neighborhood a particularly egregious example of state-sponsored cross-border terrorism. The world is gradually becoming aware of the global nature of international terrorism. Our relentless efforts have kept it in the spotlight, bringing out related aspects like terror finance, radicalization, and cyber recruitment. The goal remains to reach a comprehensive convention on this subject, and we will not rest till that happens. The third example is, of course, of the most contemporary concern, that of pandemics. It is clearly the driver of the theme today of crisis and cooperation. And indeed, one is the question and the other is the answer. Allow me to speak briefly on both. I am a member of the ministerial group that was charged with monitoring the COVID challenge and coming up with a response. Understandably, it is difficult to sum up the full complexity of the problems we faced. But let me say this. A nation that had no preparedness for such an enormous crisis responded in a way that should give us all confidence in our future. A country where PPEs and ventilators were not made, where N95 masks were assembled in small quantities, where testing kits were not produced. And we should really ask ourselves, why not earlier? Today, not only meets its national needs, but helps beyond. If we have created more than 15,000 dedicated facilities with 1.5 million isolation beds, if more than 1 million Indians are tested daily by 7,000 centers, if Arogya Setu was devised to facilitate contact tracing, then it speaks volumes about our inherent capabilities. Not just that, our social discipline was extraordinary, standing out in comparison with many developed economies. Clearly, this was the influence of leadership and motivation at work. The challenge now is to take this ability to rise to the moment of crisis and transform that into a more routine set of practices and procedures. And I truly believe that the India which will come out from the COVID crisis will do just that. While focused on all these, we have also organized the Vande Bharat missions to bring Indians back home from distant lands. More than 24 lakh of our people have been repatriated through flights and by land and sea. From Air India to the Indian Navy, we pressed all our resources to achieve this goal. The intention was very simple. Today's India will not leave an Indian abroad in distress. After all, we are in many ways a unique economy that is heavily reliant on mobility and migration. Our credibility depends on the assurance we provide to those abroad who contribute to progress at home. The diaspora has not just been an economic factor. They have helped determine India's branding in the world. And I was struck yesterday at the range of Deepavali messages that I saw from politicians in different countries on the social media, underlining how much our community today matters to the world. There are many lessons from the COVID experience that we will all be reflecting on in the coming times. The immediate focus is on economic recovery, and the figures for September and October have really been encouraging. There is also a greater awareness globally about more resilient supply chains. It is up to us to exploit this sentiment for additional engines of growth by creating better conditions for production. The recent announcement of production-linked incentives for various sectors is significant in that regard. Domestically, there is a clear realization of the need to embark on the next generation of reforms that addresses challenges which were neglected by a more narrower vision. The changes we have seen in regard to agriculture, labor, and education are some notable examples. If there is a big takeaway, it is in the power of digitization, one that could come into play thanks to the achievements of the last 6 years. We saw that not only in contact tracing, but in providing resources and supplies on an unprecedented scale to the most needy during the corona period. But from my perspective as foreign minister, what this crisis really brought out was the importance of international cooperation. Just look at the Vande Bharat mission. It would not have been possible if multiple governments had not standardized procedures, whether on testing, on quarantine, on movement, or on transit protocols. Many, especially in the Gulf, went out of their way to expend their own resources for the welfare of foreigners. And India has reciprocated in full measure. More than 1 lakh foreign residents were assisted to go back to their homes in these difficult times. As demands for medicines, especially hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol, spiked, we stepped up production and supplied 150 countries, more than half at our own cost. Today, the focus has shifted to rapid testing and reliable vaccines, both essential for the return to travel normalcy. And we are at the heart of international and multilateral collaborations in this regard. Prime Minister Modi has committed to the United Nations that we will help make vaccines accessible and affordable to all. And believe me, from the regular conversations that I've had with so many counterparts, the world is counting on us to do so. Now, all clouds have their silver lining, and we must try to come out of this crisis with a stronger sense of cooperation. If health security is the immediate challenge, the perennial ones cannot be neglected either. In the last few years, India has emerged as the first responder in our immediate vicinity to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief situations. We have been there, whether it was the Nepal earthquake, the Yemen civil war, the Mozambique cyclone, the Sri Lanka mudslides, or the Fiji typhoon. This is taking our peacekeeping tradition to a completely higher level. Our commitment to maritime security has also been growing, reflecting the changes in the ability of others to contribute. By strengthening maritime domain awareness and monitoring bird shipping, we are making the oceans below safer for the entire world. On terrorism, our efforts have contributed to a larger awareness of its different facets. The FATF has become a more important forum, and black money is today firmly on the agenda of the G20. The world no longer sees it as a law and order issue. On connectivity, we have actually shaped the debate on the merits of transparency, market viability, environmental friendliness, and respect for territorial integrity. And in many parts of the world, ranging from Africa to the Caribbean to South Pacific, we have helped to strengthen capabilities, offer training, and spread best practices. These traits in India's foreign policy outlook will only be stronger in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. We have always displayed a strong solidarity with the global South. This is even more important today. The world now is increasingly multipolar. Rebalancing has gone beyond its economic facet to assume more strategic proportions. But an architecture with more variables also requires better rules. Instead, we have seen an erosion in multilateralism. If a global health crisis that had such a destructive economic impact helps create a change in mindsets, India must steer that in the direction of greater international cooperation. This may not be as easy as it sounds, as current institutions are rigid and vested interests are really strong. In the interim, therefore, we have to look for practical solutions, including ad hoc group of nations willing to cooperate on selected issues. But our day and that of better global cooperation will surely come. It took one crisis for the G7 to eventually give way to the G20. It may take a few more for reform of structured international organizations, especially the United Nations. The world is not going to carry on with business as usual. The winds of change are blowing again. Those with a more self-centered view of world politics will have to come to terms with the needs of the day. We are entering a different era, at home as much as in the world. It will be a more aspirational time, certainly a more demanding time. But to make that happen, it will also have to be a more self-confidence approach at home and a more cooperational one abroad. Transforming this crisis into an opportunity for nations to work together on the big issue of our times is really the main challenge for diplomacy today. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for your electrifying and enlightening words. He is the one who truly believes in Tiruvalluvar saying, wisdom is to live in tune with the mode of the changing world. And Dr. Jaishankar, as India's foreign minister, is actually leading and showing the India way in devising diplomatic strategies for an uncertain world. As you rightly said, we indeed require more dispassionate debates on diplomacy that rises above competitive politics. Now, I invite Professor Rajendra Srivastava, Dean ISB, to deliver his address on technology and global engagement.
It was very inspirational listening to the Honorable Minister, and indeed we must learn how to convert crises into opportunities. The theme for today's summit, Crisis and Cooperation, stretches across cooperation not only with entities and countries abroad, but also cooperation within India. The challenges are many. If we step back and reflect on what the country can do, there are many problems, there are many wicked problems that are worth solving and many opportunities worth pursuing. Let's take healthcare to start with. India has been a leader in process innovations. We are able to deliver healthcare in areas such as eye care or looking at placement of stents and angioplasties. We can do it at 1/50th of the cost that is encountered elsewhere in the world. But we need to look beyond that. We have a huge talent pool. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, whether it is in Norway in the north, or you go to the southern tip of Argentina in Terra del Fuego, you will encounter Indian doctors. Increasingly, as you go around the world and you ask, where's the nursing talent coming from? The answer is typically Philippines. But you probe further, the second answer is always Kerala. It's not even India. It's again the talent pool that is there. Imagine if we can stretch it across other areas like testing, medical technology, telemedicine. India can become the caregiver to the world if we look across the entire healthcare ecosystem, not simply training human capital so it can go abroad, but we should look at how we can solve larger problems looking at the ecosystem. If we look at education, today there are about 550,000 Indians who are going abroad for education, and this is for higher education. And they're spending about $50,000 apiece, mounting to about $27 billion. If this could be kept within India, and if we could generate the universities that are needed, places like Ashoka, places like Shivnadar, places like Paksha, then we would be not only saving foreign capital, but we would also be creating an opportunity for the rest of the world to come to India for education, and thereby increasing the soft power of India in the process. So this is an opportunity. If we look at what we have already done, and a good friend of mine, Tom Magnanti, professor at MIT, he mentioned to me that, Raj, India has two great brands, IITs and IIMs. How come they don't work together? It is indeed the time has come that we should leverage the technologies from the IITs and other institutions like Tata Institute for Fundamental Research, AIIMS, and so on. We should leverage the research and technology coming from there and combine it with the enormous management talent that we have coming out of the institutions. If we look at what India has contributed to the world, it is not only startups in Silicon Valley, where about 30% of the startups seem to have an Indian co-founder. But look at the leading companies in the world, whether it is Microsoft, or it is Google, or it is IBM, or it is MasterCard, or it is Nokia. These companies, these technology-driven companies, are being led by Indians. What we need to do is similarly focus on how we can leverage the technology that is being developed indigenously. and how that can benefit the world. Again, moving from healthcare, which is the focus of the next panel. If we look at Fintech, then within India, we have a public platform. The US may have Amazon, China may have Alipay, but India, we have Aadhaar and we have UPI. We are able to manage transactions over cell phones. The mobility of capital within India is incredible. And what we have learned in terms of using these public platforms could actually be exported to the rest of the world. India could become a leader in the financial technology areas. And what the State Bank of India has been able to do with YONO, you only need one integrated account, can actually be exported to not only emerging markets and growth markets, but it would be a contribution even to the United States in terms of what we have learned, in terms of managing technology to increase the efficiency. This efficiency of technology is going to cut across industries. We take healthcare. One of our alums runs an emergency healthcare organization. Simply through the KYC, simply through knowing the KYC through Aadhaar, his company is able to identify the hospital the patient needs to be taken to, given the insurance arrangements. And this is enabling him to cut short the error rate and also reduce the amount of time it takes to take the patient in an emergency situation to the right hospital. Similarly, whether it is onboarding patients in hospitals or onboarding customers at a bank, the amount of time that is needed has been really drastically reduced. As we move forward in the spirit of cooperation, what we need to do is reflect how companies, how academia, and indeed how the government can work together in achieving changes in healthcare, in education, in sanitation, changes that will impact globally. ISB, along with the IIMs, have been a part of WebHub, which is also instigated out of the Prime Minister's office, to look at how do we bring the scientists in the Indian diaspora to work cooperatively with scientists and educators within India. An ISB working with the IIMs was responsible for the management vertical. One of the recommendations that we came after inputs from about 40 to 50 academics globally was that we need to focus on setting up industrial and research clusters where we can begin to look at policies that are necessary, whether it is digital policy or it is healthcare policy. We need to work collaboratively within India across academia, industry, and government, but across the world to set up consortia that will allow us to begin to take the lead in these important areas. So already India is a leader in infotech. A lot of research is being done in India. Unfortunately, it is sometimes patented in California. We need to capture that value closer to home. We are becoming a leader now in educational technology, and we are also beginning to take quick steps towards process innovations that are going to help the modern healthcare era. It is today possible to run an EKG on a cell phone. And through AI ML, you get an instant reading whether the EKG is normal or not. It is sidestepping the entire infrastructure. So we need to leverage the digital technologies and combine it with the incredible management talent that we have. So what does India have? We have human capital. When we combine human capital with technology and collaboration, not only with the Indian diaspora, but collaboration with our colleagues that work around the world, we can move much further, much more quickly. The future is challenging, but we shall prevail. And as the Honorable Minister said, never waste a good crisis. It's time to pivot and use the crisis to create opportunities.
Thank you, Dean Srivastava, for your words of wisdom on technology and global engagement. Now I invite Sri Sunil Kant Munjal, Chairman, Mohali Campus Advisory Board and member of ISB Executive Board, Chairman, Hero MotoCorp, to deliver his address.
Thank you, Dr. Jaishankar, for giving your time for what we believe is a very important initiative. I want to add my welcome to Dean Rajas, to the Minister, to Sri Rahul Chabra, Secretary Economic Relations in the MEA, and the many participants who are here from India and from other countries as well. This is a brilliant initiative to bring together some serious thinking to how India does its global diplomacy. First, compliments to the Minister on launching a states division, because as you said yourself in your address, Dr. Jaishankar, India is no longer about a monolithic institution. It is about the states and the people's aspirations, needs, and where India is going right now in a much more connected world. But at the same time, it seems to be pulling in different directions. Our own culture, our heritage is so rich that it actually would be a shame if we let this opportunity go. Talking of culture and conventions, if you just look at this period right now, over the last 3 days, we've had Deepavali, we've had Vishwakarma, and we have Bhai Dooj today. How many nations in the world would be able to say things like this? And all of these are done in a collective, collaborative manner by India across the nation and by Indians across the globe. So ISB is both delighted and proud to be host to this Deccan Dialogue. In its 20 years history, ISB has created a new paradigm in management education, focused on research and practical application of research in real life situations. It is now ranked amongst the leading institutions in the world and has an amazing symbiotic relationship with industry, academia, and civil society, which is the comments you, Minister, have made on more than one occasion. I remember when you came to address us at the Mind Next event, you made some very interesting comments on how economics has changed the metrics of influence across the globe. And it is true. We are seeing that change, which again you referred to in your book, The India Way, how the world from a bipolar world for a short while seemed to become a unipolar world, and now has multiple poles apparently now coming up. And I like the right line that you wrote in there, which you said, it is time to engage with America, manage China, cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, and bring Japan into play. I don't think anyone could have said this better as to the realities on the ground, which are changing the landscape for geopolitics and geoeconomics. You're also right. That is no longer only about exchange of trade or technologies, but knowledge is playing and will continue to play a very significant role in how we position ourselves as a player in the world. As a nation which is headed to be amongst the leading nations in the world, we do know our economy is growing faster than many others, barring the current temporary dip, which has impacted the whole world due to the COVID-19. Clearly, we are one of the faster growing economies on a cumulative basis as well. We are increasingly being invited to the top table in global dialogue. As you yourself mentioned, you are part of a number of these initiatives, whether it is on energy, or it's on environment, or it's on healthcare, or it's on currently addressing the situation regarding the virus and how to deploy it. It is clear this is not a quick and an easy fix. Therefore, many of our plans will have to look at this in two stages. One is the immediate short-term needs of the next 2 to 3 years, and then the longer-term need, which may be quite different from what the need is while we're trying to resolve the situation around the COVID-19. Fortunately, our economy has started to show good traction in parts of the economy. There are parts of it, unfortunately, some of them which have large employment, which are still struggling and will need help and support, both from government and industry and the like. And I think this India situation becomes as much part of our global diplomacy as what is happening across in the world. I remember about 20 years ago, when CII, we had this very intense dialogue with the Ministry of External Affairs as to why each of our diplomats needs to be trained in economy as well, and not just in diplomacy. And I have to say there was some early resistance, but very quickly, the leadership within the ministry itself found enough traction to say that this is the right thing to do. And we started multiple annual events and events during the year where industry would sit across the table with diplomats, Indian diplomats in different countries, and global diplomats in India, to try and talk about where we are going and where we would like to go, and why India wants to stand up and be counted on the world stage for its merit, not for any other reason, not for subsidization, but on merit. And we have an amazing brain bank sitting across the globe, which is the Indian diaspora. And I think we need to bring them increasingly into play for us to be the force multiplier that we can be in many ways in help supporting the world in some of the initiatives which are global in nature, whether it's to do with health, environment, education, and the like. But at the same time, I do want us to constantly keep a watch on what is happening in the trade blocs. Only 2 days ago, we've had 18 countries sign a trade agreement from which India had withdrawn some time ago. I do hope that we will keep an eye on how that is going to impact us. And it was sensible of India to pull back, because we had a clear view that pulling tariffs down to near zero have hurt us in some areas, and we need to build up our strength before we start creating zero tariff arrangements. And you refer to that yourself in your dialogue as well. And I am delighted that ISB and the Ministry of External Affairs continue to partner in multiple initiatives. And this is just one of the examples. I have a suggestion for you. It is ISB's 20th year next year, Minister. And as you know, we have set up multiple centers of excellence and institutes. In that sense, we are one of the most unique business schools in the world, which looks at things like finance and logistics through centers of excellence, family business, where we run a full program. And we also have set up 4 institutes, one focused on manufacturing excellence, one focused on logistics, one focused on infrastructure, the third one on public policy, and fourth one on healthcare management. I think it may be an interesting idea for us, either within one of these or to create a separate center of excellence on business and diplomacy. How economics and business need to become an equal part of our global outreach as a nation. And ISB would be delighted to host this if the ministry would think it's a good idea to create such an institution. Because as you know, we are amongst the few which are multi-focused and multidisciplinary in our approach as to how and why we need to create leaders for the future who are able to straddle multiple poles at the same time, because the real world is never in silos. The real world actually operates across many, many disciplines. So thank you very much for your wonderful address, for the partnership that ISB enjoys with the Ministry of External Affairs, and especially with the States Department and the leadership across both ISB and the Ministry of External Affairs, which has made this dialogue. And I hope it will continue to strengthen and become an important part of the annual calendar of conversations for India and for India's diplomacy. I also want to thank Sri Rahul Chabra for making time to be part of this panel, because he plays a critical role in looking at our economic relations. And that's where one of the key areas of focus is for all of us right now. We as India, we as Indians, we as Indian industry, and we as the Indian education system feel it is essential for all of us to come together to build a stronger approach to how we look at ourselves and how we look at the world, as also our approach. It is reciprocal in many cases, but need not always be reciprocal, as we have also shown in some cases in the neighborhood itself. So clearly, we are taking a much more surer approach in the world, and more power to all of you. Thank you very much for being part of this interesting and I hope a very useful dialogue. Thank you.
Mr. Munjal, thank you so much for your comments and also for seeding that idea of a center of excellence that you've just said, and we look forward to the Honorable Minister's direction on this. You did mention about training diplomats on economic and business related issues. You'll be happy to know, you already know, but I'm sure I do want to sort of reiterate here that ISB has had the fortune of working with the Ministry of External Affairs over the past several years in training IFS officers as part of their mid-career training program in partnership with the Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service. We've trained officers from the 79 batch onwards, and we look forward to that continued partnership. Honorable Minister, we sort of had this thing of wanting to create this virtual tree plantation that sort of led to a small confusion at the beginning. I'm sorry about that. But the only thing something that Dean Srivastava or Mr. Munjal would tell you if you were to be here at our campus is that planting a sapling is not just sufficient, but you have to sort of make repeated visits every year to water it. But I would say on this occasion that since you haven't really planted the sapling there, we look forward to hosting you on both our campuses, in fact, in Hyderabad and in Mohali, whenever the situation permits, so that you can come and see the plant that you've virtually planted today. But of course, it's symbolic of the sort of relationship that exists between our two organizations, and we thank you for your support. I do want to make a couple of very quick recall points from your talk, which is very, very illuminating for all of us. One, in terms of the fact that you said there needs to be greater global awareness. And I think it's exactly with that objective that this whole initiative of wanting to create an initiative like Deccan Dialogue within a business school like ISB was started. Because we see our young graduates wanting to train in matters of business and leadership.
Minister is showing us the planting.
Excellent, sir. Thank you. So on digitization, MEA is way ahead of us. So that's just another tribute. Thank you so much. Sorry, I couldn't see it on the screen, but thank you, Mr. Munjal. So I think you spoke about greater global awareness, Honorable Minister. I think that's one of the reasons why within a business school, we are trying to create these dialogues so that our graduates, when they sort of go on to take up leadership positions, are far better aware of sort of the nuances between diplomacy, business, trade, and so on. That's one of the things. And I think there are so many other points, but, as someone who's just read your book, I can say that this is like one of those, sessions that you get as a bonus at the end of a, masterclass. So that's what your 30-minute address has been. I want to thank you, your ministry, and Ambassador Rahul Chabra, Ambassador Jaishankar, and everybody else for their support.